We're live.
Well, good morning, siblings and saints. We are here from All Saints Lutheran Church coming to you during this Holy Week on this Thursday. This Thursday night, we'll be talking about Maundy Thursday, and Vicar Michael will lead us in part of that discussion, as well as Pastor Rebecca, who's going to look at Suffering Servant and a little bit of Hebrews for us. Crash is going to chew on a bone throughout the Bible study. New bones make many doodles happy. And then I'm going to talk to you just a little bit about Good Friday, which both services, Maundy Thursday, which is on April 14th, and Good Friday, which is April 15th, both of those services are at 7 o'clock. And then we're not going to talk about Easter at all because we want you to worship with us. Easter Sunday worship is still inside. It is at 9 o'clock and 10:30. That's the exception for this time of year, is to have that additional 10:30 service. We're not going forward with that. We're still coming back. So if you're plugging in online, watching the video, or coming in person, I believe we are still masked through Easter. And then after that, I believe it might be lifted. So stay tuned on that. I don't know exactly. We will have more conversation with our congregational council as well as our SMART team. I recognize that many places, like the grocery store, all that kind of thing, you can go in without your mask, but we still have a vulnerable population that we're keeping safe, and we're being good neighbors. So sorry if that's hard for you, but on the other hand, still at the very end, hopefully, of a pandemic. This will be the first time we get back together inside the building for Easter after 2 years. So that being said, you'll notice that one box is missing here on the screen, and that's because Pastor Tanner and Katie had a little baby girl, and she's doing well. Mama's healing. They are tired and happy, and Lorelei Jean is beautiful. You will all be smitten. But to kick it off, I'm going to pass it to my friend and colleague over there, Michael, Vicar Michael, Maundy Thursday.
All right, thank you. Good morning, saints and siblings, or if you're turning in a little later. For Maundy Thursday, we have some very familiar, we have what I will say common, but at the same time, I like to say uncommon stories that we've been sharing for many, many years. And Maundy Thursday has many different angles to approach from. And as my technique is to go at it head first. So we are looking at Maundy Thursday, the special meal, the special gathering of Jesus and his best friends. And at this night, on this evening, we have friends who are going to hear, see, and feel what Jesus means by loving one another. In fact, we will be given this mandate, hence the term Maundy, which I always knew meant something more. In my brain, it always had this sense of sadness, but it's not. It's the sense of a mandate. And that's what Jesus does for us. This new commandment, this new way of living and understanding. The readings that we will be hearing on this evening are 1 Corinthians 11, 23 through 26, which are the words of institution that we are so familiar with. But at the same time, in familiarity, we also understand the possibility, and that's what I am appreciating and realizing even more in this real tactile, hands-on piece of bread and wine, and with that, body and blood. When we truly share what Jesus is offering us and what we share every time at communion. And it is such a special time, a special way of sharing. And that's why as we approach what I also am praying and hoping for the end of this pandemic, that we can have more of this physical contact, this piece of sharing the body and blood of Christ. And the specialness of doing this as often as you can. Some of the flavor, what I hope to share in my sermon on this piece is the bringing together of family, not just our immediate family, but also our larger family in Christ, and how important it is that we remember why we're doing this. And that, again, is that part of the story. Moving into then the gospel reading, will be coming from the Gospel of John, chapter 13. It's split up a little bit, 1 through 17 and 31 through 35. And in that, we are really approaching this effort of understanding, and I say effort, of what Passover meant to all of these people. And by no way to diminish and say we're borrowing and taking from that, but understanding Passover is this wonderful meal and preparation. And that's what Jesus and friends were doing. They were preparing for one of the most holy times of the year, sharing that together, but then also moving into what Jesus was going to give to us, and that being his own body and blood and what he would do, knowing that even at that table were his very best friends, his very trusted colleagues, but knowing that some of those wouldn't have that trust, that some of those might question what was happening. And boy, that sounds just like me. When I have questions, when I have doubts, that's perfectly fine. It's a matter of trusting in God that sometimes, even as Jesus said, you might not understand why I'm washing your feet, but kind of let me do that. I have to accept that sometimes I might not understand, and that's perfectly fine. When I operate from that place of being loved, it just allows those spaces to be there and be filled. And that's what happens with this. As we're going through the foot washing, I know it seems like a strange and uncomfortable piece, but it's one of those when we think back to the story of Mary anointing Jesus's feet, we think about our own feet. And I'm still uncomfortable. I've never had a pedicure. I know some of my stepsisters and such have had, and they said it's just the most wonderful thing in the world. And Jesus isn't exactly giving a pedicure, but I know a lot of those start with like a foot soaking and all that kind of thing. And I have had to soak my feet. As you know, I'm a cross-country skier, and I've had some pretty beat up feet after my races. And it's one of those things where just to have someone pamper you, just actually being there. But then our feet being such a well-used piece, but then Jesus taking the time, taking the opportune time really to show what it meant that Peter and all of them had so much trouble understanding. What are you doing? Almost like saying, don't do that, but then realizing that in this moment, Jesus is going to show this loving care that might not seem to be something that Jesus should be doing, but it's exactly what Jesus does and exactly who I see Jesus to be, the one who will lay down his life for you and I and for all those people, and that faith that helps build this. I use the example of a big family dinner. Easter growing up was always a huge meal, and I know we're not supposed to talk about Easter right here, but I was prepared for this big meal. And Maundy Thursday is a way of preparing for this big meal, this big gathering, but a meal that we will continually share. So with my family, we would have, probably over 20 people all gathering together, all the excitement, and all of this was really held together by my grandfather, who would always say grace. And in saying grace, I always think of the words of what Jesus offered here, of being thankful for the food, of providing the food, and also sort of spiritual food as well as realistic food in what we're eating. But my grandpa would offer these words, recognize everyone at the table, but be so thankful and blessed for being at that table. And for many, it's one of those where I think if my grandmother was more willing to speak, she was kind of a very traditional Swedish person, and God bless her soul as well. She was the backbone for a lot of these pieces as well. And my grandpa would offer these words to the point of being in tears of how much he loved this family. And I carry that with me to this day and how much I miss that. But then every time I do have this meal, when I do share with family, those warm feelings come right back to me. And that's why we share these stories, so we can continue to participate, continue to share this love. And that's where Jesus offers the mandatum of this new commandment to love one another. And what does that mean? What does that look like? And for me, it means what I've done most of my life, having a life of service. And it means being with family, being with friends, and especially meeting new people, be able to share the joy and excitement of what Jesus did and what Jesus does for me every day. And that's part of my focus for Maundy Thursday, is inviting people to this beautiful meal to experience this new commandment, but it's a commandment of love. And it's not something that should be an obstacle, but it's something to practice, knowing that as we sit at the same table together, we come from many different paths. We come for many different reasons, but we also come because that is Jesus who we love. And that's what I hope to share and celebrate with everything, is that love for Jesus and what love that we can share with others. So that's where I'll finish my piece today. I encourage you to read more on this, reflect on this. And if you're going to be having one of those big meals together, maybe kind of be that fly on the wall and sort of see what those interactions are, see where that is. And maybe you'll get a new sense or feeling for, wow, there's something bigger than me going on here. And that's that blessing that I hope you share over this Holy Week. Thank you.
What passage are they supposed to read?
It's John chapter 13, 1 through 17, and 33b through 35.
So they could read just the whole chapter.
Correct.
And you got a little bit of info from which book for this round?
I was using this commentary. It's called Feasting on the Word, and it has probably about 100 different authors that all kind of are interspersed throughout on commentaries through the lectionary through the year. So this is our lectionary C, and we have a whole set of the church. So I suppose, I don't know if there's borrowing of that, but it's a wonderful way of looking at both exegetical, a preaching type text. So they approach it from kind of 4 different angles and really gives a nice big, almost too much information for me at times to try to process all there, but lots of good lenses into the word.
Yep, it gives you a contextual, exegetical, homiletical, and practical approach, 4 different sections. And I believe it was edited by Barbara Brown Taylor, whom most of you know.
Mm-hmm.
And there's one other author who is the editor.
David Bartlett and Barbara Brown Taylor are the 2 editors.
Excellent theologians, and many of you who have been following all the preaching styles in the church have heard me invoke Barbara Brown Taylor's name. If you haven't read any of her books, I have plenty of them on my shelves, and they're just wonderful because she does an incredible job imploring the senses. In fact, she teaches how to implore the senses, and as a little preaching tool that I've used with students, and I haven't done this yet with Michael, but he's going to be doing this. You go through and you highlight all of the senses that have to do with smell, taste, touch, and you put them all in a different color. So you make sure that when we're preaching, the word just, goes out and it doesn't return empty, but there's a little bit more of a sensual piece to that, in that you're, what are you smelling? What are you tasting? What are you seeing? What are you hearing? And that touch is the piece that you're looking at a little bit, with the tenderness of the feet. And I was thinking about that phrase you said, as oft as you drink this, right? I love that. I love that phrase. And then I read a book last week called The End of Cravings, which I thought was a really interesting book. I can't remember the author off the top of my head, but basically he was trying to figure out why in America we continue to be unhealthy. and how can we become more healthy? And so he did this study looking at Italians and how Italians are really healthy and they have longevity, especially in this one particular section of Italy. And he came to the conclusion that along with like the Seder meal and this Italian community, they treat food and mealtime as if it is a full experience to be shared with one another over a long period of time. And those of us who have traveled, I think particularly in Italy, you can find yourself sitting at a table for 3 or 4 hours and doing many, many courses, but never really getting full because there's conversation and there's, you know, moving around and there's getting to know different people and other people just showing up at your table. And Americans kind of, you know, think food is fuel and I'm going to drive through and get it and get filled up and be done. And I think that sitting at the table at the Passover, I mean, I've sat with other folks for Seders, which Christians do not need to do on their own. But if you are invited into a Jewish home to experience one, that is a really sacred moment. And it takes time and it is to be experienced. And what I love about the Seder meal, the Passover meal, is this idea: do you remember when we ... It's not our ancestors, it's that embodiment of, do you remember when we walked through the wilderness? Do you remember when we ate the manna from heaven? Do you remember when we tasted the bitterness, you know, of slavery, and just all of that sort of all encompassing? This community of ours is still here and now and will be and not yet, you know. It's just like it's to be experienced fully, not just, it's not fuel in and out. It's as oft as you eat this, as oft as you drink this, remember me. So beautiful. And of course, the lovely image of the servant, both of Mary and of Jesus, bending the knee and tending to. So that's where we're going to spin into, I believe, the third servant song from Isaiah. Or did you want to tackle the Hebrew first?
Either one, but I'm going to flash forward to the fourth servant song, the suffering servant, simply because that's where Jesus ends up. It is so difficult for me to look back at Good Friday. I'm a retired pastor. I've served lots of churches. And when Jules first mentioned looking backwards and looking at Good Friday, Maundy, Thursday, thank you, Michael, my mind goes blank. Or pictures flash of the Ukraine and the Ukrainian people right now, and the pain and the horror that they're experiencing. And there really isn't very much about the people watching Jesus being crucified. Good Friday being the day that he dies, and the torture and the hell. There were lots of crucifixions, lots in the day that Jesus died. How was this one separate from the others? How did the people know what was going on? Everything was gone. Everything they'd hoped for. And again, I cannot get Ukraine out of my mind as I think this date. Words that you folks will know very well. Suffering servant, starting with 53.
Wait. What chapter are we in?
Isaiah 53, third verse. He was despised and rejected by others, a man of suffering and acquainted with infirmity. And as one from whom others hide their faces, he was despised and we held him of no account. Others died the same day Jesus did, not just the other three. They were dying all the time by crucifixion. It was one of the Romans' favorite methods of torture, death. And the world became dark. And in Isaiah 4, surely he has borne our infirmities and carried our diseases. Yet we accounted him stricken, struck down by God, But he was wounded for our transgression, crushed for our iniquities. Upon him was the punishment that made us whole. And by his bruises, we are healed. All we like sheep have gone astray. We've turned away from our own way. And the Lord has laid upon him the iniquity of us all. And then carrying on what Jules said earlier, he was oppressed and he was afflicted, yet he did not open his mouth. He took it as he watched people desert him and walk away. Even his mother, silent there standing at the foot of the cross, at least in the Gospel of John. Others would watch him from a distance, and his disciples deserted him. And at the meal that Michael told you about, they were arguing all that he had given, and the ones to whom he had given it didn't get it. No, I can't imagine it. I can't do Good Friday. I will hang on to pieces like the Good Friday text in Hebrews because it repeats the promise in Jeremiah that the Holy Spirit testifies for us, saying, this is Hebrews 10, starting really with verse 16. This is the promise that Jeremiah spoke of, God saying, this is the covenant that I will make with them after those days, says the Lord. I will put my law in their heart. I will write them on their minds. He also adds, I will remember their sins and their lawless deeds no more. Where there is forgiveness of these, there is no longer any offering for sin. It's not necessary. Jesus did it all. But to stay in Good Friday and not go forward to Easter is almost intolerable. So much so that one of the churches I served refused to have Good Friday services. It was so awful, so devastating. Apparently preachers before me had done such a good job of the horror that the church refused to come. They refused to celebrate Good Friday. Good in that that was when God died, and later God would rise God from the grave. And when the back of pure good was broken, the back of evil was forever destroyed. And we still live with Ukraine and with the blood and with the memories of other wars. But there is a promise, and Jesus is God who lives that promise. And I need to go back. I can't stay in Good Friday. I need to go back to Hebrews 10 and the promises. And we can't yet get to the resurrection. So it's really hard to stay in Good Friday, except to remember that without Good Friday, we would not have an Easter. So thanks be to God for God, and I'm sorry I can't do Good Friday.
I like to think about Good Friday as sitting Shiva,
Okay, not that.
where,
I like
where if you don't know that word, it's a good one to look up on the wiki. Shiva, S-H-I-V-A. I was gonna also mention as we enter into Good Friday that Beth and I had gone to the Passion of the Christ. Remember when that came out like many years ago? It was the Mel Gibson one, and it was so brutal. And it was like, you are responsible for the agony, suffering, and death of Jesus Christ. Like that's the message that you got out of that movie. Because it just ended. I mean, it was brutal. That's not what we're doing on Good Friday.
May I go back to sitting Shiva?
Yeah.
Because that's beautiful. That's when someone dies, everybody comes and sits with the family, because there really are no words in that situation. But that's what I'm missing on Good Friday. There aren't any words about the disciples getting together, in the locked room, but that was after the resurrection. There's no word about what those who were loving him did. It's silence. It's like our rotten COVID plague. I mean, people aren't together, they're separate. They're mourning their grief. We don't know whether they got together or not, but there are no written words about their sitting Shiva, about their sitting with each other, which would have been a comfort, Jules, but I may have missed it. I don't see that either. It's really awful.
It feels like they dispersed.
Yeah, exactly.
And that's part of what I'm talking about Well, first of all, we're gonna set the tone for Good Friday by singing Beth's favorite song, which is "Ah, Holy Jesus."
Ah,
It kinda
surely.
shares her piety a little bit, but it's a powerful song.
And mine. Yeah.
It's one of yours too.
Oh, for sure.
Maybe
My
that's like
Grandpa Zachary.
the Finnish Apostolic Lutheran Church.
Yes.
Yeah. We're going to spend time in dwelling in the word, embodying the word in the sense that we're going to read the entire Gospel of John 18 and 19, which, might seem like, oh, great, I'm going to go to church and get a whole bunch of words. But we need these words to set the tone for what's going to be happening on Easter. And then we'll complete our worship service with the sanctuary choir doing this beautiful African song, "He Never Said a Mumbling Word," which I think is we depart in silence, and we too are dispersed to sit in our own place of remembrance of the sacrifice that was given for us, and then we just stay there. We need to just stay there, and it's uncomfortable because I don't know that any of us know how to grieve well. Some of us have lots of practice around grief, but it's hard no matter what the loss is. So one of the words that stood up to me when I was thinking about Good Friday comes from Brene Brown, Atlas of the Heart. We studied this at All Saints this last fall, and into January, I believe, January, Feb. And we took it section by section. And you all know Brene Brown. If you haven't heard her TED Talk on vulnerability, look it up. It's like 5 gazillion people have seen it. That was her earlier works. But this book, what it does is it talks about becoming more emotionally intelligent. And I would say also more ethically intelligent, so that we can respond instead of react to things. We live in a world that's very polarized, and I'm trying to advocate for a world that lives in more paradox than polarization, the both and, not just my way or the highway dogma. As I was reading through the book, I was dumbstruck when I came to page 90. And this is the section that's called Places We Go When We Are Hurting. Anguish is the word that made me stop and wait and think. Anguish, according to Renata Suzuki, anguish is one of those words you understand the meaning of just by the way it sounds. It has this gnarling rasp to it as you twist your mouth around to say it, kind of like what feeling it does to your insides. It's an awful, drawn out, knotted up word. It's also one of the things I feel without you. I liken this word to what it feels like to be betrayed. And all of us have had some level of betrayal that we have experienced in our life. Some perhaps minor, some middle ground, some major, some that have knocked us sideways into 2 years from now. And Brene uses these words to describe it. Anguish is almost an unbearable and traumatic swirl of shock, incredulity, grief, and powerlessness. Shock and incredulity can take our breath away, and grief and powerlessness often come for our hearts and our minds. But anguish, the combination of these experiences, not only takes away our ability to breathe, feel, and think, it comes for our bones. Anguish often causes us to physically crumble in on ourselves, literally bringing us to our knees or forcing us all the way to the ground. I have no doubt that when Jesus was taken away, by the Roman soldiers. And in this politically charged time, 2,000 years ago, that the disciples felt utter and total anguish. They had lost their true north and they had no idea where to go. And as I preached a couple weeks ago from the perspective of Judas, we don't know exactly what Judas was feeling, but I have a feeling that after he had seen what did not present itself in the way that he had hoped, that he too felt this kind of anguish. So Good Friday is really that space that we sit in where we recognize the anguish that all of us feel corporately as the Christian church for what Jesus went through on our behalf. Then we sit with that. And on Easter Sunday, we move towards this place of recognizing the tremendous effect that this new life, this resurrection life that we already have, is not a timid grave standing, tending to a grave, but rather it is this resurrection life. And in the message, it says, instead of tending that grave, we look at Abba Father and we say, what's next? What's next? So we have to, it's the now and not yet. We have to remain in that space. And yes, recognize that the anguish is not just the things in our own personal lives, but that it is also global. And we are going through not only the end of hopefully the end of a pandemic, but that we are in solidarity with those who are ripped from their homes and have nothing but that which they carry on their back, particularly around Ukraine and in other warring countries. I mean, there's much restoration that needs to occur. And Good Friday is the night that we remember Jesus taking on sin and evil and going toe to toe with it and winning. But not yet. But not yet. So we invite you into those sacred spaces, both on Thursday, tonight after you watch this video, and then on Friday at 7:00, we'll be online. If you have trouble driving at night or you're not ready to be back in physical community, and then of course on Easter at 9 and 10:30. So peace be with you. If you need us, we are here for you. Let us know how we can walk with you on this journey. And thank you so much for tuning in and being a part of this Bible study. Peace.
All right, thank you.